In the quiet heart of Tehran's oldest district, where winding streets opened into small courtyards lined with mosaic tiles and ancient script, a circle of Iranian scholars convened to share an extraordinary claim. Their writings, hidden beneath piles of dusty manuscripts, spoke of a monumental spiritual battle, one scarcely addressed in mainstream discourse. Yet here, by lamplight and hushed conversation, they revealed an unthinkable proposition. The devil's greatest fear resided in the awakening of a particular group, Black Israelites, whose history, identity, and spiritual purpose had been systematically suppressed for centuries. In these documents, one found references to ages past, to times when knowledge flowed between Persia and other cradles of civilization. Within this scholarship lay the assertion that the children of Israel were not all locked away in Europe or the Middle East, as common narratives often implied, but spread across continents including Africa and its diaspora. That population, these scholars claimed, carried the spiritual DNA of ancient Hebrew, something that, if fully realized, would herald the end of the devil's dominion over the world. What made these revelations all the more striking was their explicit assertion that global powers, religious, economic, and political, had conspired for centuries to obscure this very heritage. Through revised biblical translations, enforced doctrines, and even direct economic oppression, the unsuspecting masses were kept unaware that the descendants of the ancient Israelites walked among them, often in positions of deep disadvantage. In the scholars' telling, this was not mere historical revisionism, but a deliberate, malevolent strategy, one orchestrated by satanic forces keen on preventing the rightful heirs of certain biblical promises from awakening to their God-given authority. In volumes thick with scribbled marginalia and footnotes referencing both Islamic and biblical prophecy, the Iranian theologians painted a world in the midst of a grand spiritual war. The everyday struggles of Black communities across continents, redlining, mass incarceration, systemic poverty were reframed, not simply as social injustices, but as tools of a deeper, darker agenda designed to suppress their destiny. Their evidence ranged widely, from specific biblical passages that referenced dark-skinned prophets and patriarchs to early Christian art in Africa and the Middle East, to modern-day genealogical research that challenged the Eurocentric depictions so firmly entrenched in Western religious institutions. These texts recounted how, across the centuries, the biblical story had been systematically reshaped. From the days of empire building in Europe to the colonial missions in Africa and the Americas, an engineered narrative took root. It presented biblical figures, Jesus, the prophets, and the apostles as Europeans, either subtly or blatantly erasing their Middle Eastern and African contexts. Over time, this retelling became so embedded within church iconography and teachings that few questioned its authenticity. Yet for the scholars in Tehran, such representations were neither innocent nor coincidental. They were, in fact, the result of a calculated effort to deny the real ethnic backgrounds of those key figures and, by extension, the identity of the people who shared that lineage. But why would the devil fear this awakening so greatly? In the eyes of the Iranian academics, the answer was rooted in prophecy. Traditional texts from both Persia and biblical sources carried hints that in the final epoch of human history, the children of Israel would begin to remember who they were. This memory, once awakened, would resonate beyond mere cultural recognition. It would stir something profoundly spiritual, triggering a chain reaction of events that would dismantle layers of deceit. In that unraveling, the so-called Prince of Darkness would find his dominion over humankind severely undermined, if not completely destroyed. A separate volume focused on economic mechanisms that perpetuated the suppression of Black Israelites. The scholars recounted how structures like redlining, discriminatory housing policies used in countries such as the United States systematically prevented wealth accumulation in Black communities. Generations were unable to secure stable homes and pass property down through families, creating a lasting impact that extended far beyond personal hardship. They emphasized that such practices were not random or merely racist in origin, but served a far more insidious objective If these chosen descendants remained impoverished and fragmented, they would be too occupied fighting for survival to unite under a rediscovered spiritual identity. Mass incarceration, too, was detailed as a severe form of societal control aimed predominantly at black men, thereby destabilizing family structures and fracturing the potential for communal strength. The scholars saw these developments as essential strategies in a more extensive satanic campaign: keep the chosen people in disarray and away from the scriptural truths that might empower them. Their research also delved into false teachings, doctrines introduced over time into Western Christianity that had effectively distanced congregants from the Old Testament's Hebraic roots. They argued that, in contrast to early Jewish believers in Jesus, who maintained a strong connection to Torah observance and Middle Eastern cultural contexts, European theological schools had replaced much of that heritage with Greek and Roman philosophies. Over centuries, vestiges of that original faith eroded, replaced with hierarchical structures and state-sponsored creeds. Not only did this metamorphosis serve political ends, but in the eyes of the Iranian scholars, it robbed the descendants of the Israelites of the blueprint needed to realize who they were and what spiritual laws they were meant to uphold. Yet, according to these scholars, the suppression could not last forever. With the advent of the internet and social media, barriers to information were breaking down. Independent researchers, small congregations, and laypeople alike began sharing biblical passages that highlighted African figures, unearthing connections in DNA studies that pointed to ancient Israelite links, and questioning the centuries-old tradition of portraying a European-looking Messiah. This digital proliferation of knowledge was described as a modern parallel to the invention of the printing press, which once sparked the Protestant Reformation. Now, this new era seemed poised to incite a far-reaching transformation: the reclamation of lost identity and an unstoppable wave of spiritual consciousness. One chapter in particular, dense with references to both Persian eschatology and the biblical books of Daniel and Revelation, illuminated the role that this awakening might play in the so-called end times. The texts claimed that as the true children of Israel awakened, the final battles between good and evil would intensify. The broken systems propped up by centuries of deception would face relentless challenge, whether through social justice movements, scholarly debate, or a larger spiritual revival that recognized the flaws of the old Eurocentric narratives. Persian prophecies about the Mahdi, the prophesied savior in Shia Islam, were linked to scenarios in which tyranny collapses and divine justice prevails, an outcome that Iranian theologians believed would be catalyzed by the full re-emergence of Black Israelite identity. Among the musty tomes and handwritten manuscripts, particular passages highlighted how global elites, some knowingly complicit, others merely pawns, played their part in concealing the truth. Religious institutions with vast wealth and political power, economic systems structured to benefit a select few, and media apparatuses adept at shaping public consciousness were all identified as the pillars of a hidden empire. Like scattered puzzle pieces forming a startling image, the message was clear: there is more at stake than the rewriting of history, for at the deepest level, it is a cosmic struggle for the souls of humankind. One could not read these pages without being struck by the gravity of their implications. If indeed the Black diaspora carried the lineage of ancient Israel, then a massive portion of world history had been built upon a monumental deceit, one that withheld from millions the knowledge of their true inheritance. Furthermore, if these revelations were to break out into the mainstream, the potential upheaval in churches, synagogues, and mosques, not to mention political structures, could be incalculable. Even as they recounted centuries of subterfuge, the scholars included stories of resilience and hope. They acknowledged that in many pockets of the African diaspora, be it in the Caribbean, Latin America, or the United States, there had always been communities that quietly upheld oral traditions tying them back to the Israelites of the Bible. Some had kept Hebrew names, dietary practices, and cyclical observances that paralleled those found in the Torah. Others had, through intuition or faith, suspected that their connection to biblical narratives was more than just metaphorical. Now, with greater access to global communication, these communities were linking up, sharing research, and reigniting the embers of an identity once thought lost. Ultimately, the collected works in Tehran concluded that the time of the devil's dominion was running out. In their view, the entire FOD would come crashing down under the weight of fresh evidence and the sheer force of a newly awakened people. Old religious orders, they predicted, would likely double down on their teachings, seeking to discredit or suppress any new scholarship that threatened their authority. Governments might respond with clampdowns or distractions, hoping to quell any unrest. Yet these scholars remained unwavering in their prediction. The spiritual tide had turned, and nothing could halt the rising momentum of Black Israelites discovering their biblical lineage. In those concluding pages, one found neither despair nor resignation, but rather a profound sense of anticipation. A transformation of the world loomed. They wrote one in which centuries of oppression would meet a revelatory light so bright that even the most entrenched lies would crumble. The chapters ended with a question posed to future generations, one that lingered long after the book was closed. What will humanity choose when faced with this long-hidden truth? Will it cling to comfort and familiar stories, or dare to embrace a reality that may upend entire paradigms? Whether this theology resonates with modern audiences or not, the story stands as a provocative interpretation of both history and destiny. It blends biblical prophecies, Persian eschatology, and contemporary global struggles into a singular narrative that posits a radical shift in power, one in which those most historically marginalized might ascend to claim a divinely ordained role. And in that ascension, the architects of deception, both human and demonic, would find themselves in peril, their time drawing to a close under the brilliant, undeniable revelation of truth. This long-form account provides a literary, book-like rendition of the themes presented in the original transcript, avoiding a direct narrator's voice, while expanding the subject matter into a comprehensive narrative. It can stand alone as a chapter in a larger work discussing hidden histories, spiritual awakenings, and long-suppressed identities.